Welcome, Kaleah LaRoche. Would you like to just take a few minutes and kind of tell our listening audience the services you offer, who you are, just a little synopsis?
Wow. Okay. Well, it's hard to put myself in the synopsis, but I'll do my best. Well, I am a clinical hypnotherapist, training in holistic counseling and shamanism. So I have more of a spiritual approach. And about 20 years ago, I started researching narcissism and narcissistic abuse just because I had gone through a relationship that knocked me off my center, and I needed to understand what was happening. So that started a long journey, and I started writing books as a result of my research and taking clients. I was already obviously clinical hypnotherapist and holistic counselor, so I started using my counseling and hypnotherapy to help people who had been in narcissistically abusive relationships, and that became my specialty. And then I brought in, of course, the spiritual element, which I feel is so important to healing, from something like this that's so deep in our soul, because a lot of people that go through these narcissistically abusive experience this darkness like they never have before, and it takes them so deep into their own pain and their own trauma and their own insecurities and fears and everything like that. And there's a kind of a soul loss that happens that psychology doesn't really address. So I just started really working on that level and having a lot of success with people. And I've been doing that ever since. And the beauty of it is that now people are coming to me more just for spiritual healing too, as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be, I've been traumatized, I've been in a narcissistic relationship. It could just be, something hasn't felt right. And I feel like I'm not on purpose, or I feel depressed, or I feel lost, or anything like that, that they come to me to help walk them through that darkness and help them find their authentic self.
Right. So some of your books have been on specifically narcissist abuse.
Right.
And then the two latest that I'm aware of is Rebirth, Traversing the Dark
The
Night
dark night of the soul.
of the Soul, and then your latest Path Back to Self-Love.
It's path to self-love.
Path to Self-Love.
And it's soul recovery from narcissistic abuse and toxic relationships. So this book is really focusing on self-love, but it's kind of appealing to the audience, the same audience that I've been appealing to. And then the book before that was Healing Narcissistic Abuse and Finding the True Self. And before that, it was The Rebirth, Traversing the Dark Night of the Soul. So that's
so
kind
I
of
mean, narcissistic abuse isn't specifically isolated to an intimate relationship.
No, not at all. It can be family, it can be boss, it can be best friends, it can be
a society.
Siblings. Yeah, society. Oh, yes. Definitely.
Yeah. So I thought, given all your expertise, and I jotted down shamanism because that's a huge piece that maybe isn't super strong yet in our Western society. It's here, but not in the forefront for sure. But I think it's a huge part of what our topic is going to be today, the soul's invitation and soul recovery. So I just jotted down some notes and hope to bring it up in this podcast, and so you could share your expertise with the audience. I happened to catch the latest interview on Buddha at the Gas Pump, and it was with a gentleman by the name of Mark Anthony. Are you familiar with Mark Anthony at
I
all?
don't think so.
He's a psychic mainly, I guess. But he was sharing some things in this interview that are so related to our topic today. And I thought I would kind of bring them in and get your feedback on them. One of the things he said, and I thought it was so interesting, and I don't think it was his definition, it was somebody who said this to him, the definition of soul, soul, source of universal love.
Mm,
Well, yeah, yeah.
I
Um,
I like how
yeah,
SOUL, source of universal love. That's beautiful.
yeah. And then a couple other things that he said that got my attention was the soul being EMS, electromagnetic electromagnetic soul. And something about that just really resonated with me. And I might look deeper into his work around that, but that really resonated with me. So I thought I'd bring that into this mix. And since I communicated a little bit before the podcast today, that there's a main fears that really go not just through my clients, but through a lot of people I've talked to throughout my life, and having to do with spiritual awakening and the fear of losing control is a big one, and an identity crisis. Having an
Mm.
identity crisis is a big one. So I'm just gonna give the floor to you and see what you think about the when people have a spiritual awakening, why is it that they are experiencing anxiety and depression? Is that connected to the dark night of the soul?
Well, I like to think of soul. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful ways to describe it, that as our true life force energy that we embodied into this physical form with,
Mm-hmm.
and that we come here with a sense of a mission or a purpose. And if we have strayed, wandered off purpose in our life, or have been so traumatized that we've really separated from ourselves, then our soul really does want to inform us or let us know on some level that we're off course. And I think it does that through things like depression and anxiety and fear, and I mean just a lot of those kind of human things that we go through. There can be these warning signs. I think the biggest warning sign is just extreme dissatisfaction with one's life that can show up as depression. I'm so unsatisfied. I wake up in the morning and I just don't even want to be here, or my life doesn't seem to have any meaning or any purpose or any joy. And that that those feelings are really asking us to go deeper into ourselves, to find out why, to go on that investigative journey of why does our life not have meaning or purpose or joy, and how can we change that?
Mm-hmm.
How can we peel away the layers of all that we are not, in order to step fully into all that we are
Mm-hmm.
naturally, all that we've come here to be?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. So as far as soul recovery, does how does one get disconnected from their soul to begin with?
Life. Life has a way of disconnecting us. For one, our society is extremely disconnected. So when you're born into this society, you're born into a program. This is who you're supposed to be. This is what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to act. And none of that teaches a child to be who they are, because you grow up in these programs of, no, don't do that, don't think that, don't feel that. And so we start to learn very early to shut down from what we really think and what we really feel because of society's messages.
Yeah, because the goal is to fit in rather than to be who you truly are.
Exactly, to fit into a program or a system. And then, narcissism is a big part of that, of course. We have a very narcissistic society, which when I say that, I mean disconnected. I mean focused on the outer appearance of things, success, money, physical beauty, just possessions, what makes us look good on the outside.
The surface.
The surface without any concern for what's going on in the inside. In fact, the message we get is, just buck up and deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Or either don't cry, or I'll give you something to cry about, or, some of these messages that we get as children that we carry with us into adulthood. And then if we start migrating towards narcissistic type relationships, that furthers the message that who you are doesn't matter, has no value. It's what you do for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's society's message too. Who you are doesn't matter. It doesn't have any value. It's what you do for society. It's how you're showing up. It's how much money you're making. It's the job you have. It's the title you have. It's the educational degrees that you have. That's where your value is. It's how beautiful you are. It's how attractive you are to society, but who you are on the inside, we don't care about that.
Well, a question that comes to mind, and it's not a typical question for me, but it came to my mind. So if somehow this magic wand was waved across the land, across the world, and everyone was given permission to be who they are, and through being who they are, match what they are doing to who they are, what would happen to the societies that we live in? What would keep kind of the luxuries in a way that we're living in going?
I think
not that you're gonna,
No, not that I'm going to know that, but what comes to my mind, because we're both very intuitive, is that, what was the definition of soul you first told me?
Source of universal love.
Source of universal love. So if there was a magic wand waved over us and we all became who we were, wouldn't we all just be the source of universal love, and we'd be living in this loving universe? Connected, loving, able to connect with each other, able to see love as the highest value. And imagine if love was the highest value that we held, and not all this external appearance stuff that we put so much value on.
We'd probably be working together in unity to keep the world going. It just, I guess I have a question in my mind. What would the world end up being like? Because it might be very, very different than the world we're living in.
Well, it certainly would be very, very different if we all were true to our purpose, because, the thing about the ego is that the ego is very much grounded in competition. There's a lot of competition because it's a survival mechanism. So we compete to be better, to win, to survive. And the competition is what really hurts our society. I mean, it's not just fun, healthy competition, it's cutthroat competition. And, that's led by the ego. I need to win. I need to win to survive. I need to be the best. And, that's kind of what's happening. Our society is so steeped in competition, and we need cooperation, not competition. So I imagine if we were living from the heart and we were living from who we really are, there would be no need to compete, because we'd have the understanding that nobody can do Irma better than Irma, and nobody can do Kaleah better than Kaleah, and that we're all these unique beings of light that come here to be who we are, and we start to love and appreciate each other's uniquenesses instead of trying to compete to be better than each other in some way.
Yeah. So that fear that gets expressed sometimes when I'm talking with different people, that fear of an identity crisis, I mean, that's coming from this place of identifying with the program, your programmed self, and somewhere this fear of, if I lose that, who am I? Who am I? What is there? And isn't that then the point that a person may need to seek support for soul recovery? Because, I mean, how does a person has no spiritual connection, maybe even no religious connection, but yet they have some kind of awakening?
Right.
How would they know what to do? I could see where it would be the dark night of the soul, but a person that doesn't have that language wouldn't know that they are experiencing the dark night of the soul, or might not even know what soul is.
Right. And there's a lot of different descriptions that people use for the dark night of the soul, but it's my belief that we're all being guided even through the dark night of the soul, but we just don't realize, or we're not listening, or we're not paying attention. So when I work with people, it's a lot about connecting people to their own wisdom, to their own inner guidance. It's not necessarily me being the guide, but me being the one that helps to connect them to their own inner guidance. And so whether you believe or understand soul or not isn't so important, as it's important to understand that there's a wisdom within each one of us that is unique to who we are, that is guiding our lives. And if we can learn to plug into that wisdom and allow it to guide our lives, and even to recognize the difference between the ego, and soul. I've heard it said that when you're trying to listen for inner guidance, that if you get a long explanation, or you ask for guidance, you ask for directions, and it's like, well, you could go this way, you could go down that road, and you can take a right. But, if you go there, then what if this happens? And, so you might want to go this way. That's the ego. But if you just gotta go right, that's the wisdom of the soul. So our ego gives us the long explanations, and the ego can feel conflictive. Like, you could go this way, but if you go this way, then so it starts to kind of argue with you about all the things that could happen if you went that way. And it tends to be more of a sales job sometimes. You know, like
Trying to
want to go this
convince
way because if
us.
you go this way, then this can happen and this can happen.
Yeah, almost like a
And
temptation.
yeah, whereas the inner guidance is just go this way, turn here. And I've had times in my own life where that voice was very strong. Like one time comes to mind of driving down the freeway on my way home, and I hear the voice that says, pull off at the next pull off, take this long way home. And I'm thinking, my ego self is like, I'm tired. I don't really want to take the long way home. And it's like, pull off at the next exit. And it's like, okay, okay, and it was so strong within me that I took the next exit and found out when I got home that I just avoided a huge, like 10-car pileup where there were several deaths. And, it's like our inner guidance will do that for us if we listen. But if we get into the argumentative part, we're not going to listen. Well, I don't really want to take that long way home. It's, I'm tired. I want to get home as quick as possible. That's the argument, right? But the inner guidance is just pull off, turn now, and it can be firm when it's saving your life or stopping you from having a serious accident or something.
Yeah. And because we are kind of programmed and taught not to listen to that, and it gets buried, and extend the pulling off, listening to that voice that says pull off the road here or turn right, extend that into the type of work we do, the people we choose to bring into our lives. I mean, all these different aspects of life. If we aren't tuned in and we've kind of buried that authentic self, and we're kind of running on that ego's direction, then we end up not living our lives.
Right.
Our lives that are true to the essence of who we are, we end up living a false life. But we might not even know that we are, because we think we're doing the right thing by fitting in and all the things.
Yeah, I had a client once that her dad was a lawyer, and her family, she came from a family of attorneys. And her dad told her she would be a great attorney. And so she was kind of conditioned that she was going to, go to school and become an attorney. And she went through all the years of school and became an attorney. And she's probably on her first year when she called me. And I don't remember exactly why she called me. There might have been, it might have been a narcissistic father or something like that. But what came of that is I'm not an attorney. I don't want to be an attorney. This isn't who I am. But I've just gone through 8 years of school.
Whew.
And I've got these college loans and,
Yeah.
these student loans, and, I don't know what to do. And that's an example of somebody doing what they should do, or they think they should do. I should go to college. I should become an attorney because, it pays well, and it's prestigious, and people will admire me. And, there's all these kind of the argument, right? That's the argument of the ego.
Yeah.
And then there's the soul that's like, that's not who I am. I'm not an attorney.
Yeah. Yeah. And therefore, that feeling of an identity crisis. Like, well,
Right.
I thought this is who I was.
Right.
And, an identity crisis, a spiritual awakening, even a spiritual emergence, I think it's called now. But if people don't have the language, a person could feel like maybe they're going crazy or really doubt themselves or just really get thrown way off balance, and to find the right kind of support when things like that are happening, because it all depends on who you turn to. Luckily, this lady you're talking about turned to you and you were able to guide her, but say, what if she turned to,
a traditional psychologist
yeah,
that
yeah,
values that education, right?
yeah,
That values all those years of
yeah,
school. And yeah, and that does happen a lot. And in fact, it happens to people before they even come to me, before they find me.
yeah,
But a lot of people that find me, it's like, it's kind of miraculous how I found you. You just popped up and, in the strangest place, or, it's almost like their guidance is guiding them
yeah,
to me,
yeah,
to somebody that could really get what they're going through
yeah.
and help reflect that back to them. Because in narcissistic society, and I said, I think this woman may have had a narcissistic father, it was many years ago, that, if she tried to talk to her father about that, what do you think would happen?
Right.
She'd get the narcissistic response of, just get over yourself, just stop it, go to work, this is who you are, do your best. But if one starts talking about feelings, well, something doesn't feel right. I feel like I'm losing a piece of my soul every day I go into the office.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like I'm in alignment. And maybe those aren't the words that would be used, but that would be what the feeling is trying to communicate.
And the traditional psychologist, and I'm not, picking on psychologists, I'm sure
No, there's great
ones.
psychologists. There's great psychologists.
But some of the traditional psychologists, their job at that point, if someone came to them with what you just described, their job is to help a person adjust and get themselves to fit in, to fit,
Into the norm.
into the
Because if you
norm.
fit into the norm, you're considered well adjusted, right?
Right.
And I even found out, this was really disheartening for me, that and I don't have this verified. I heard somebody talking about it, and I'm sure it's pretty close. The definition of depression, or the treatment for depression, that psychologists kind of have to follow the book, just like doctors are supposed to follow the book. And there are certain treatment modalities. And when you accept insurance, you're kind of at the mercy of the insurance companies and what they will pay for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you lost your spouse and you fell into a depression. Okay, that would be normal grief, right? Normal depression that comes with losing a spouse. Well, they used to give you 6 months before they diagnosed you as clinically depressed, which the recommendation is medication. But then they decided that somebody only needs 3 months to adjust to a death of somebody they've spent their entire life with. And so now medication is being offered at 3 months of losing a loved one. Well, you should be over your depression by now, so let's medicate you. And this is the society we're living in right now.
Yeah.
Is that you should not be depressed, even if there's a good reason to be depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard there's a man out there, gosh, I'm not going to remember his name, but he's from the UK and he's written a book on depression. And he was clinically depressed, and he was on every kind of medication from a very young age. And, it's like nobody really helped him to get to the root of why he was depressed. He was just medicated. And that's, one of the issues with our society is that we don't try to find out why we feel the way we feel. We have medications for that.
Wow, that's rough. Yeah, and as you were saying that, Kaleah, something that came to my mind was, this whole, dark night of the soul and identity crisis and spiritual awakening, not knowing what it is, and all of that. Grieving a spouse, grieving a loved one, grieving the death of someone. Well, when this dark night of the soul is happening, wouldn't you be grieving the self that you thought you were? Wouldn't there be a grieving process going along with that?
Absolutely. Who am I without you? Or, and that comes up for a lot of people in divorce. That's another area, divorce,
Yeah.
separation from somebody that has been in your life for a long time or even a short time. I mean, we build our lives around people. And when that person disappears from our life, the question comes up, who am I without you? Even if it's an abusive spouse, who am I without that abuse?
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways, if you come from an abusive family, you have abusive parenting, you have an abusive spouse, the abuse becomes part of your identity in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes it might be easier to hear what a horrible person you are from the outside than to continue hearing it from the inside.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Because we take on those voices, right? You're inadequate. There's something wrong with you. You don't fit in. You're stupid. You're ugly. You're whatever. You're not worthy. That's the big message. You're not worthy. And after a while, we adopt those messages. They become our core wounds, our core beliefs.
Yeah.
And I think it's easier for many of us to hear those voices coming from outside of ourselves instead of being left alone with them.
Mm.
Because when they're outside of ourselves, it's a little easier to fight them, right? No, I'm not. I'm worthy. It's easier to kind of fight with that person. But when those voices are coming from within us, it's like, okay, maybe this is who I am. Maybe I am unworthy. Maybe I'm not good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and fighting that external person or external situation is kind of like shadow boxing. You're boxing with your own shadow.
Right, right, right. So we have to make friends with our own shadow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a process. I mean, I've gone through good 3 dark nights of the soul in my life, inspired by different things or brought on by different things. I think this idea that we just have one and done,
Yeah, that was going to be a question I was going to ask. Yeah, do we have more than one? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a process of shedding. I think the dark night of the soul is like the metamorphosis of the butterfly. We
Mm-hmm.
have to shed the old skins. We have to shed who we thought we were in order to step into who we are. And sometimes that happens in layers, and so we go through one dark night of the soul and we shed this and this. And then we go into another one, and it could just be multiple metamorphoses that we need in order to fully embody who we've come here to be.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they say that those who go through the metamorphosis, that go through the dark night of the soul, are often the most interesting, real people you'll ever meet.
Wow, because until and if a person goes through that, unless, of course, they were encouraged and supported from the get-go to be their authentic self. But until and if a person goes through that shedding of the false self, say, they're going to have a feeling of being split being split, like there's two of them instead of being aligned, kind of the persona expression is aligned with the essence of the soul. So it doesn't feel like there's a split and there's two. And that two, that split kind of creates this power struggle, I would say, within, and would be exhausting on many levels.
Well, yeah, because it's a battle between the soul and the ego,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
So I've got, I don't know if you hear it. I have my cat outside my window meowing at me.
Oh, I
So,
don't hear it at all.
oh, she's like, I want to be a part. Get up and go open the door and let me in. Wants to be a part of the conversation. She knows when the good stuff's happening, but I'm glad you don't hear it.
Do you want to let her in? Would she be distracting?
No, because then she'll want to go out.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Cats are a little narcissistic. I don't, gotta love them. But
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So with the shamanism that you practice and you offer, how is that used in helping a person with soul recovery?
Well, shamanism, what I've learned, I've worked with about 4 different shamans, and I'm talking about people I believe to be true shamans. And I say I practice shamanism, but I don't claim to be a shaman. And that is because I understand that shamanism has these rituals that are, it's kind of like taking the dark night of the soul, but quite literally, shamans will frequently be buried alive and have to go through that initiation. So there's these series of initiations that they have to go through where they have to confront death, in a sense, over and over again. And as a result of confronting death, like being buried alive, all the fears that would come up, I think they usually give them like a breathing hole with a tube or something like that so they can breathe. But, all their fears are going to close in around them and they have to confront those fears. Oftentimes there is, psychedelic types of journeys like ayahuasca and things like that, that also causes one to leave their identity with form and confront death. So from my understanding, I haven't participated in ayahuasca, nor have I been buried alive, or some of these other things that that are really representative of confronting your own death in a big way.
The dark night of the soul.
Right. But it's a little bit more immediate in a sense, where the dark night of the soul is kind of a process of the psyche that can take a couple of years, to navigate through.
Yeah.
And, or less or more. I don't want to say, it's just 2 years. It can be less or more. But the thing I've learned about shamanism is shamans learn to see in the dark, in a sense. So that means they see beyond the seen world. They see into the unseen, into the unseen world. So when they work with a person, they can see into the unseen world. They can see those cordings and the, kind of where the soul is at, and the power of that soul, and where that soul is blocked. And they can help that soul to navigate through that darkness. And some of the experiences, like in my training, I was on a table and the shaman was drumming, and I recognized that I had this like psychic knife in my back. There was like this knife, I could feel it. I'm like, there's a knife in my back. And of course, I'm waiting for the shaman to do his magic and take the knife out, right? Well, let me pull that out for you. And he's like, you got the power. You take care of it. And so he kept taking me back to me finding my own power to, get that psychic energy, those stabbing in the backs and all that, to get rid of it. And so, I just took this really long, deep breath, and I just, and suddenly it's gone. And I started to really kind of reclaim my own ability to confront the darkness instead of going to somebody else and saying, would you please take this knife out of my back for me? And so what shamanism did for me is it helped me to find my power and to do battle with the darkness using my own energy and the guides around me, the light beings around me that I'm working with.
Mm-hmm.
And so my work with others in shamanism is much the same. It's to be able to see in the dark, to be able to intuitively go in there and say, this is what I feel is happening, or, and I typically say feel, not think,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm feeling into what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
So help them to see for themselves what is going on and then find the power to correct that. So even in my hypnosis sessions that are soul retrievals, cord cuttings, things like that are shamanic practices, in a lot of ways, I'm having them do it. I'm having the client do the work. So it's not just a lot of soul retrievals. A shaman will say, well, I'm going to work on you at 1 p.m. on Tuesday, so just tune in.
Yeah.
And they do it from afar.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do is I take people into hypnosis so that they're in a deeply relaxed state, so they can be more imaginative and more tuned into what's happening. And then I have them do the work, in a sense, repeat after me, and so they're learning to reclaim their power. They're learning to do that cord cutting themselves, in a sense.
Yeah. I guess I'm always wondering, like, especially in our Western society, if you aren't going with the norm, or you aren't going with mainstream, or if you are and there's this awakening and things start getting shaken up and you are confused, dazed and confused, to find the right kind of support. It still seems to me that it can feel for some people like looking for a needle in a haystack.
I think if there's any soul energy guiding one, and if there's any ability to listen, and if there's any desire to truly transform and rise above it, that people will be guided. And they may need to go to the traditional psychologist, for example, first, to have that experience. So, because our society puts people with higher education in that field up on a pedestal, in a sense, and it's like, well, they have more knowledge and they have more information, and they can be of better help. But you don't learn the stuff I'm talking about in higher education. And some people that are really plugged into that matrix, maybe that's where they need to start.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people come to me dissatisfied with what they're getting there. They don't feel understood. And that's the first thing I hear. I just don't feel like my therapist got me or really got what I was going through. And oftentimes, because they come through the door of narcissistic abuse, they tell me that the therapist doesn't understand narcissistic abuse or any of the terminology or any of that. So they find themselves having to educate the therapist. Well, that kind of goes against their belief that the therapist is all knowing. well, they've gone to school for umpteen years and therefore they should know all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just like doctors and nutrition. Doctors go to school for a very long time, but if you, if you don't know how to eat right, you're going to have all kinds of medical conditions, but the doctor won't tell you that. You go to a physical, there's a few that will. There's a few doctors that understand the importance of nutrition to health, but most of them, it's about what medication can I give you to help to treat the symptom. And so the person that wants to heal may have to go to an alternative healer to, learn how to eat right and, learn how to take care of themselves in a way that healing will happen from the inside out in a natural way, instead of, masking the symptoms through drugs, through pharmaceuticals. So, it's the same kind of thing as when we're plugged into that matrix that of higher education, which is government regulated, that they control it. And the insurance companies and big pharma, they're the ones that control what you can do and not do and what's taught and what's not taught. And it's really, like you said, it's really to get us to conform to the norm. And it's normal. If you get, one of my pet peeves is getting around older people, mature people, and they start talking about their aches and pains and what medication they're on. And, that becomes their conversation.
Becomes who they are. Yeah.
Right. They identify with that.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes people have to start with modern medicine, like if they have their cancer or whatever, they might have to start there. And then something says, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go that route. It doesn't feel right to me. And so they start to seek alternatives. And that's what happens with modern psychotherapy as well, is one might start there. And unless that psychotherapist also has alternative knowledge that he or she can use, such as somebody that's done the deep dive into the spiritual, that's also a shaman, that's also, a clinical hypnotherapist or whatever that is bringing that element in, you're going to just plug right into the matrix and maybe not get what you need.
Well, yeah, because certainly that spiritual aspect, a lot of times you're not going to find in a psychologist's office.
But, I see it as kind of like the mental science constructs in a way. The mental constructs, because psychology is of the mind.
Like cognitive therapy.
Yeah, it's of the mind. It's not of the soul.
Yeah.
And so we work with the mental, just like medical doctors work with the physical, and the psychologist works with the mental, and the minister works with the spiritual. But none of them do a really great job with the integration. And so that's where the alternative therapy comes in. And even when I'm working with clients, I ask them about their diet sometimes, like if they're struggling with a lot of autoimmune diseases, or they don't have energy or things like that. It's like, well, what's your diet like? Because, that plays a big role too.
Yeah.
We can use food to suppress our emotions. We can eat a ton of junk food, and so we're not going to feel much energy or vitality in our life because we're so plugged into that system of the standard American diet. So we have to really consider all of it, the mental, physical, spiritual, the holistic.
Yeah. And something that I'm working with some people now around, and I think this is such an important piece, and it doesn't get well, maybe it does. I don't know. I only know my own experience. But, the fourth state of consciousness, which is also known as Turiya. So mass consciousness, mainstream, functions within those three states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, and sleeping. But the spiritual is actually the fourth state of consciousness, which is kind of behind all the other states of consciousness, but doesn't get acknowledged, doesn't get integrated. And to me, that's a big piece for, soul recovery, spiritual awakening, that fourth state of consciousness. And it seems like a lot of times, even in the spiritual arena, it's not acknowledged as even existing, but it does exist. There is a fourth state of consciousness that's a big missing piece in the other three states of consciousness. It's there, but it's not integrated. It's not kind of brought into the three-dimensional existence. That's a huge missing piece.
The piece of our true essence, our true soul, and I don't know if that's in alignment with the fourth state of consciousness, because I'm not familiar with that terminology, but I do see that, we are, I heard Deepak Chopra of all people say that, on death, says like, well, when we die, we don't go anywhere, because people are like, well, where do you go after you die? And he goes, we don't go anywhere. We're already there.
Exactly.
We're already there. We're already connected to God. We're already one with God or in spirit. And we just kind of come into this illusionary physical form.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just how much are we integrating that spirit that we are down in, anchoring it down in to our physical experience, our physical form and our physical experience.
Yeah.
And when we do the soul retrieval, it's like, well, the soul is there. We talk about soul loss. It's really soul disconnection, to be honest. We disconnect from our true essence,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like we disconnect from God, it's not that God has abandoned us, mm-hmm. It's that we've abandoned God. Mm-hmm. And so when we call back the soul, we're really asking the soul to take up more and more space in our reality, and that we can live by that truth and by that sense of connection, and really work on being connected and being guided by those higher states of consciousness.
Yeah, because to me, the whole process of birth, life, and death, that cycle is whatever point you are in your life, to have that understanding that wherever your conscious awareness is in this physical form, that's what's going to remain after the physical form is gone. So it might be a good idea to
well, they talk about heaven and hell, right?
Yeah.
As states of consciousness, not as places we go.
That's right.
As states of consciousness. So if you're living in hell and you die, you're taking the hell with you,
Yes,
and that's why suicide is such a bad idea.
Yep.
Because people commit suicide in their dark night of the soul, in their darkest moments, in their states of hell. Mm-hmm. So, not a good idea.
Yeah. And that's, I think if people really got that piece, like whatever you are experiencing in your life in this moment, when the body goes, that's going to be your experience. It's going to be, that's the importance of soul recovery. That's the right. Importance of that
feeling connected to the oneness. It's like, well, then that's what you take with you, that connection to the oneness.
That's right. Yeah.
The only argument I have against that idea, because obviously I'm not a know-it-all. I don't know everything. I haven't died and come back. But there are people that have, and I have a fascination with near-death experiences. So I watch a lot of YouTube videos on people and their journeys, right? And one thing I have heard from a lot of people that are in a lot of darkness before they go is sometimes there seems to be a shedding of the ego. So there's an argument on whether the ego actually goes with us or if it gets left at the door, at the threshold of death. And if the ego actually gets left at the threshold of death, then any anything that is created by the ego is going to be left behind. So you do hear near-death experiences of somebody that was in a lot of pain, and even, you know, some people that have committed suicide because they were in so much pain that said they entered a place of great peace because they left, they checked the ego at the door. You know, it didn't go with them. And yet you hear other experiences too, where that does go with them. And maybe they haven't really reached the door yet, you know, the true door. So it's really hard to say exactly what we're taking with us, because there's probably a lot of layers that one has to travel through with the death process.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, that near-death experience, and I've listened to a lot of those as well, and some of them are really intriguing.
Right.
I personally feel like I've experienced not near-death experiences, but had the same kind of experiences without being near death.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and I do think that's possible, because it is, you know, that ego separation that creates the disconnect.
Yeah, and that's probably what you're talking about, is that when we can truly check our ego at the door, even in our living states here, our human states. I suppose that's what meditation can do for a lot of people, but that's the trick with meditation is that at first, when you first start to meditate, the ego's there judging you, you know, it's there telling you all this stuff, you know, and it can be hard to separate, but people experience or report that as they start to meditate and they do it longer and longer and longer, they start to have these glimpses of what it's like to be separate from the ego, to not have that voice happening, just to enter the oneness and have that experience of just being in the oneness. And that's what people are seeking with meditation.
Yeah.
But we have to kind of go through that period when we're learning to meditate to have the ego constantly bombarding us with its thoughts and its ideas, and, you know, even well, you're no good at this, or, you know, things like that. Just so when we can finally separate ourselves from that, that's when we enter the bliss states.
Yeah. So what would you tell a client if they came to you with things like, I don't know who I am. I thought I knew who I was, and then I was going along my life, and everything I thought I was, I'm finding out that that's not really me, and I'm just really confused, and I'm anxious and depressed, and I don't know which end is up.
I always start by just letting a client tell their story.
Yeah.
Because there's so much wisdom in the story.
But wouldn't that be, say that was their story at that time? You know, that what I just said, I don't know who I am.
Well, what kind of family did you come from? What do you do for a living? What, are you married? Or, you know, what has your relationship history been like? And these may seem like really common questions, but they shed a lot of light because you can kind of see where they're plugged into the matrix. And that's the start. And then we go through the job of unraveling the cords of the matrix, in a sense.
So what do you mean by where they're plugged into the matrix. What does the matrix mean to you, and being plugged into it? What does that mean to you and the work
It's
you do?
society's programs,
Society's programs.
right? What we're programmed with. So plugged into the matrix can be, well, I'm identifying as being a doctor. I use that I'm a doctor. I'm identifying with being a doctor, and so I don't know who I am without that label. Or I'm identifying as being Mrs. Jones, and I don't know who I am without being Mrs. Jones. Or I'm identifying as being, Mr. Smith's daughter, because Mr. Smith was a big, powerful man in our community. And I got a lot of attention and acknowledgement being Mr. Smith's daughter. Or, it's just like, where are you getting your sense of identity from? And how is that relating to where you're plugged in? So to the programs of society, this is why you're valuable. You're valuable because you're Mr. Jones' wife. You're valuable because you're Mr. Smith's daughter. You're valuable because you're an MD. You're valuable because, and that's the stuff I learned through my questioning, is where are they getting their value, their sense of self from? And there's usually not I am valuable because I am. And that's what we have to get to.
Yeah.
So
So
I just wanted to say that the dark night of the soul is really a peeling away of all that you are not, so that you can get to who you are. And all that you are not is, you're really not Mr. Smith's daughter and Mr. Jones' wife and an MD. Those are just things you identify with. They're not who you are. So, we have to peel all that away to get to who are you.
And that could be, depending on where a person is at with it, it could be really disorienting, because it can feel like you're losing yourself, but you're actually maybe for the first time finding yourself.
Right. And it's both happening at the same time, because the dark night of the soul is death, the loss of self, loss of identifying with these parts, and rebirth, stepping in fully to who you really are. And it both happens simultaneously. You're both dying and being born at the same time. And that's why it's called the dark night of the soul. It's a difficult process.
You do
go through loss.
How is that rebirth, the way you're defining it, different than, say, a Christian's born again experience? And I never bring up religion, but it's just because that's not, my cup of tea. But I'm just curious if there are any.
I think there's huge difference. And, I love Christianity and Christians, and I don't want to at all feel or appear like I'm making a judgment on it. But, the born again is really about accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and living by this idea, which is really another program in a sense, that you turn to Jesus as your higher self, really, as your guide, your one true guide, and your higher self, and that everything becomes about Jesus. Now, that can be beautiful, and people have really magical, beautiful experiences around that. But in a sense, they're still remaining disconnected from their soul essence. They're in a lot of ways. Now, I've been Christian. I grew up Christian. I have been baptized in the river. I've had all these experiences, and probably all before I was 20 years old. And, you know, I know what that feels like. And I also know that there came a shame piece in my experience. There was a shame piece that was part of the program or the matrix of religion, which is if you don't do. So as soon as I was baptized in the river, I was a singer, and I was singing, one of my favorite singers was this rock and roll singer. She just had an incredible voice. And so I sang her music. And my group, my Christian group that were part of my baptism said, you can't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what do you mean I can't do that anymore? You can only sing praises to the Lord. You cannot sing anything else. Well, at the time I was in college as a music major, and I was singing all kinds of stuff, right? And you know what I did? This was my first day as a born again Christian, right? That they confronted me and said, now you can no longer do this. And I said, and I'm no longer a born again Christian, I'm leaving.
Oh my God.
Because there was something within me that's like, no, there's something wrong with this, is that we have to honor, our voices and the Spirit's voice and things like that. And I didn't want somebody telling me what I could and couldn't do, because that was for my inner guidance to tell me, not for somebody outside. So it was just another program, just another part of the matrix.
But how did you know at that point in your life, at that young age,
At 18,
about your inner voice?
well, I did have a near-death experience at 17, somewhere early 17. I did it, I had an eating disorder, and I had starved down to like 89 pounds, and I left my body, and I was given a choice of, do I want to live or do I want to die? And I chose life and returned to my body. But it was more like when I left my body, I was entering the state of oneness, and it was dark. I didn't go any further. I didn't go to the light. I just heard a voice, and it was like an angelic voice, a loving, mothering, maternal, angelic voice that said that she said they would help me if I chose to live. They'd help me if I chose to pass too. But at that time, I had two visitations. The second one was the leaving my body. The first one was passing out, kind of leaving my body again, and had that same angelic voice come to me and talk to me about a purpose that I had, and she came and said, you've been given the voice of the angels, and you will go forward in life and help many people. And I thought it was my singing voice that they were talking about, but I also thought maybe I was delusional. So I didn't really, because I didn't think I had that great of a singing voice at that time, but I loved to sing. And so there was just a lot of these spiritual experiences I had just to stay alive when I was young.
So that connected you to that inner voice. It connected you to something beyond the physical.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when I had these people looking at me saying, you can't do that, maybe in some way I did connect to that guide. And it's like, no, this is your way to your voice. This is how you find your voice.
Yeah.
So you can fulfill your purpose. Because remember, it's all about it. We come here with a purpose. And I didn't know mine. I didn't know my mission and purpose. But that's what kept me alive, is being told that I have this purpose.
Yeah. Wow.
And it had to do with my voice. And now that I look back, yeah, I became a singer, and a songwriter, and I made 3 albums, and I've done a lot of performing.
Yeah.
And I still perform, and more in spiritual centers and things like that. But I also speak, I also write, I also work with people. So that voice goes beyond just singing. It goes beyond having a voice. And I think that's part of all of our mission, in a sense, is to speak our truth.
Which,
to have a voice.
yeah, which currently that seems really challenging. I mean, it really does. It really does. I mean, it's almost a feeling of if your truth goes against kind of what's accepted or maybe being pushed or whatever, that you'll immediately be dismissed or canceled.
Nowadays, yes.
Yeah.
And that does happen.
Yeah.
That does happen. So,
yeah.
My voice has gotten me in a lot of trouble.
Mine too. Yeah. Because
but we have to be brave, right? We have to have courage and keep speaking our truth.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like from a young age for me that knowing who I was from a young age, knowing I was a soul in physical form, my truth and using my voice to express that seemed to always be challenging the status quo. And that just didn't go over well most of the time.
And the status quo is the matrix.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So you were speaking outside of the matrix. How dare you, Irma?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And even from that young age, it's like you're calling it a purpose. For me, when I reflect back on that, it was like I was given an assignment. It was my assignment.
Right.
To do in this lifetime. And even having that from a young age, it's like, but I was looking for, recognition or, support, like, well, okay, I know what my assignment is, but I'm supposed to do this all by myself. And it seems like I have a language that most people around me don't really understand. And it's like, oh my gosh, I received kind of a really difficult assignment, but it's my assignment.
Right, right.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I think the waking up to who you really are is a difficult assignment, in a sense. Just that itself it's a challenge. And there's some gurus out there that have these instant awakenings, but most of us don't do that. Most of us have to go through the dark night of the soul to truly get to who we are, because we have to shed all the worn out skins. Maybe it served us for a while to be plugged in and doing what we thought we should do because we got to have that experience. But when the depression and all the things that you were talking about, I think that really happens so that we have to question ourselves. That forces us to that doorway. And it's like we might already be in the dark night of the soul, that deep depression, that feeling of lack of purpose and things like that. We might already be there, but like you said, maybe not know where we are, not know that we're on that threshold of that journey into darkness so that we can be reborn into the light of who we really are. But it's like that's what gets our attention. And unfortunately, there probably are a lot of people that, go to the doctor and get on antidepressants or go to traditional therapy and just kind of talk about things, but don't really make much progress. And those that keep searching will find. Searching, seek and you shall find is true.
Well, yeah, because those feelings of, or those experiences of anxiety, depression, grief, all of that, but say just anxiety and depression, and you go seek help for that, the approach or the, perspective of who you're going to for help a lot of times can be, well, there is something wrong with you that needs to be fixed.
Mhm. Yeah, you're right.
Instead of what's causing it. Like you said, the root of it. Where is this
Right.
coming from? It's not that there's something wrong with you, but the experiencing you're having is making you extremely uncomfortable. And, what's the cause? What's the cause? Not there's something wrong with you, let's fix it.
Right. But that's our society. Let's fix what's broken.
Yeah. And that there's something wrong with you if you're
Yeah.
feeling depressed, or if you're feeling anxious, or if you're a woman and you're angry, well, there's something wrong with you.
Yes, definitely. Well, I think what's really interesting about that too is that, say, there is a depressed woman that goes into the doctor and says, I'm really depressed. And of course, that doctor isn't going to take any time with her because they can't, because they're plugged into the medical system and being paid by the insurance companies. So they can't take time with that person. It's like, okay, we've got a pill for that. Let's try you on this much of this. And, she sees that she's been diagnosed as clinically depressed because there has to be a diagnosis to send into the insurance company to get paid. So she realizes that she's been given a diagnosis of clinical depression and given a pill, antidepressant. And so then she goes home and she tells her friends or her husband or whoever, yes, I've been diagnosed with clinical depression and I've been given antidepressants. And then her identity starts to be formed around, I am a person with clinical depression.
And everybody that knows her now puts that label over her.
Right. And so, and I'm dependent on medication to cope. And sometimes the search goes no further because she's identified, she's established that this is my problem. This is what's wrong with me. This is the cure, which it's not. It's a numbing agent. And I'm just going to be medicated my whole life so I can deal with life, so I can wake up the next morning. And I wake up with my new identity. I'm a woman with clinical depression.
Wow. Wow.
And the sad part is that some people just never go any further than that.
Right.
They never seek outside that box.
Right.
Because the doctor knows it all, right? He's a doctor. He knows. Even though he's taken 5 minutes with her only.
Wow. So does it ever get frustrating to you? I mean, you're aware of all of this, that goes on in our world. But yet, in the work that you do, you kind of have to wait for people to come to you. But yet, no, through writing your books, through your podcasts, it's like you are speaking your truth. You are putting stuff out there. Okay.
Yeah. And some people, I had a woman come to me recently that said she's been listening, and this is common, to my podcast for 10 years. And this is her first appointment, right?
Oh, wow.
And that is actually common because I've been podcasting since 2009. And so, a lot of people have been following my podcast for a long time. And they say, it's really helped them. It's really helped as a guide in their life. But now they actually wanted to speak with me, so because of something happening in their life.
Well, yeah, and possibly, depending on what's gone on in that person's life, maybe it took 10 years for her to develop feeling a sense of trust.
Right, our readiness.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Is there anything else to add to this? the name of our podcast today is The Soul's Invitation, and kind of soul's recovery and the dark night of the soul. What would you like to add to the from your depth of all the wisdom that you have?
I think the soul invitation, I love that phrase, the soul's invitation. That's really
Isn't it
beautiful.
kind of like gentle? Kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's like the prompting from the inner self and the deepest wisdom
Yeah.
to listen and follow that deepest wisdom. And that is the soul's invitation.
Yeah.
So if you have anxiety or depression or something just doesn't feel right, that's the soul's invitation to
Inviting.
look deeper.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Yes. I didn't know exactly where that title came from, but you just summed it up right there. Because there was this like connection to combining those two words, and it just felt right. And what you just put together in those words, that is it. And even though the dark night of the soul can be challenging and feel terrible at times, there is a gentleness behind it all. There is a gentleness there. The soul's inviting you. You're being invited. It just feels good.